Before we begin, take a slow breath in. And gently let it out. There is nowhere you need to go right now. Nothing you need to remember. Nothing you need to understand perfectly. Tonight's story is not meant to rush. It is meant to wander, slowly. Like footsteps on an old dirt road at sunset. If your eyes feel heavy, that is good. If your thoughts drift, that is even better. Tonight, we are going far back in time. To a world without printed pages. Without libraries as we know them. Without shelves filled with books. And yet, people still learned. They still remembered. They still passed knowledge from one life to the next. Let us begin, quietly. You may imagine a soft wind moving through tall grass. A distant fire crackling. And the low sound of evening settling in. Long before ink dried on paper. Long before words rested neatly between covers. Knowledge lived somewhere else. It lived in voices. In hands. In habits repeated every day. In ancient villages, towns, and wandering camps. Knowledge was not something you owned. It was something you carried. An elder carried the memory of seasons. A craftsperson carried the memory of tools. A parent carried the memory of survival. If you wanted to learn, you listened. There were no quiet reading rooms. No private study desks. Learning happened beside fires. In fields. On roads. And inside simple homes made of wood, clay, or stone. Imagine a small settlement at dusk. Smoke rises slowly from cooking fires. Children sit near older family members. Listening not because they are told to, but because stories are how the evening passes. This is where knowledge begins. Storytelling was the first classroom. Not formal. Not organized. Just human voices, speaking gently into the night. Stories were not told once. They were told again, and again. Until the words became familiar. Until the listener could almost predict what came next. And repetition was important. Because when there are no books, memory is everything. A story about a past famine teaches how to store food. A story about a long journey teaches which stars to follow. A story about a mistake teaches what not to do. These stories were not dramatic performances. They were calm, steady, practical. They unfolded slowly, often with pauses. A storyteller might stop to stir the fire. Or sip water. Or wait for a child to stop fidgeting. The pace was unhurried. In this world, time moved differently. Much of what people learned did not come from stories at all. It came from watching. A child watched how bread was mixed. How grain was ground. How nets were repaired. No one explained every step. Words were few. Hands did most of the teaching. A mother might say, "Watch carefully." And that was enough. Skills were passed down through repetition. Day after day. Season after season. Hands learned what words did not need to describe. This kind of learning was quiet. Gentle. And deeply human. You can imagine the sound of tools tapping softly. Fabric brushing against skin. The slow rhythm of work. In a world without books, elders were libraries. Not because they had memorized everything, but because they had lived through more seasons. They remembered droughts, floods, good harvests, hard winters, when to plant, when to wait, when to move. Their knowledge was not written. It was stored in habits and instincts. People listened carefully to elders. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. An elder's words were slow, measured, often repeated the same ideas in different ways. This made them easy to remember. And when an elder passed away, Knowledge did not vanish. It lived on in those who had listened. Some knowledge was too important to forget. So people turned it into songs. Songs are easier to remember than plain speech. They have rhythm. They have repetition. A song about farming seasons. A song about family lineage. A song about safe paths through forests or deserts. People sang while working. While walking. While resting. The sound of voices together helped fix knowledge in the mind. Imagine a slow, steady melody. Not loud. Not fast. Just enough to carry meaning forward. Even centuries later. Songs remembered things books had not yet written down. Some knowledge lived inside rituals. Simple actions repeated in the same way. Year after year. How food was prepared. How guests were welcomed. How the dead were honored. These rituals taught values. But also practical lessons. A ritual might show how to prepare for winter. Or how to divide food fairly. Or how to live peacefully together. Children learned by participating. No lectures. No exams. Just repetition. And time. Knowledge also traveled. Slowly. Messengers carried news between towns. Traders shared stories from faraway lands. Travelers brought new ideas without realizing it. They spoke of different tools. Different customs. Different ways of solving problems. Not everything was believed immediately. Some ideas were ignored. Others were remembered quietly. Knowledge moved at walking speed. And that was enough. Take a slow breath. If your mind drifts, let it drift. If you forget a detail, let it go. This story does not need to be held tightly. In the next part, we will gently explore how memory was trained, how apprentices learned complex skills without notes, and how entire history survived only through spoken words. For now, rest. Imagine the fire growing quieter. Voices lowering. Night settling fully around the village. In a world without books, memory was not rushed. People did not try to remember everything at once. They learned little pieces. Over long stretches of time. Memory grew quietly. The way a tree grows. Slowly, without being noticed. Children were not told. Remember this forever. Instead, they heard the same things again and again. The same stories. The same instructions. The same warnings. And repetition did the work. A child might hear a story every winter. By the third or fourth time, the story felt familiar. Almost comforting. The mind remembered without effort. There was no pressure. Knowledge came in layers. First, a child learned what to do. Later, why it was done that way. Much later, when it could be changed. This made learning gentle. No one expected deep understanding immediately. A young person might spend years helping in small ways, before ever being trusted with important decisions. And that was normal. Learning was not fast. It was steady. Like walking the same path every day. Until your feet know it without thinking. Some knowledge required special care. Metalwork. Carpentry. Weaving. Healing. These skills were passed through apprenticeships. An apprentice did not sit and listen all day. They worked. They watched. They copied. They failed quietly. Mistakes were part of learning. There were no written instructions to check. Only the patient correction of a teacher. A master craftsperson might say very little. A nod. A shake of the head. A small adjustment of the hands. That was enough. Years passed this way. And one day, without announcement, The apprentice realized they no longer needed guidance. Much knowledge was hidden inside habits. How to wake early. How to store food. How to speak politely. People did not explain these things every day. They lived them. Children absorbed knowledge simply by being present. The way people moved. The way they waited their turn. The way they prepared for nightfall. These habits carried wisdom quietly. And because habits were repeated daily, they were hard to forget. Knowledge was not private. It belonged to the group. If someone discovered a better way to do something, it spread slowly. Through observation. A neighbor noticed. A cousin copied. A visitor mentioned it elsewhere. There were no announcements. No written notices. Just quiet imitation. In this way, communities evolved without realizing it. History existed. But not on paper. It lived in memories of elders. And in stories told on long evenings. People remembered who founded the village. Who survived the hard years. Who made mistakes that should not be repeated. These memories were not exact. Details changed slightly. Names softened with time. But the meaning remained. And that was what mattered. History was not about accuracy. It was about understanding. Because knowledge was spoken. Trust mattered. You listened carefully to who was speaking. An experienced farmer. A respected elder. A traveler who had proven reliable. Knowledge was judged by character. Not by written authority. This made listening important. People did not interrupt much. They waited. Silence was part of learning. Nature itself was a teacher. People watched the sky. The wind. The animals. They noticed patterns. Birds migrating. Plants blooming. Shadows moving. These observations became shared knowledge. Someone might say, "When the stars sit this way, rain comes soon." And others listened. Over generations. These observations became wisdom. Evenings were the heart of knowledge sharing. After work was done. After food was prepared. People gathered. Not for lessons. But for rest. Stories flowed naturally. Someone remembered something from long ago. Someone else added a detail. Children listened quietly. Firelight flickered on faces. The air cooled. Knowledge passed from voice to voice. Without effort. Take a slow breath. You do not need to remember every word. This story is meant to pass through you. Not stay with you. In the next part, we will drift into how entire cultures preserved wisdom without writing. How memory became sacred. And how silence itself helped knowledge survive. For now, rest. Imagine the village growing quieter. Voices fading. Fire embers glowing softly. In a world without books. Memory was not taken lightly. People understood that forgetting could be dangerous. Forgetting when to plant. Forgetting where water could be found. Forgetting which paths were safe. So memory was treated with care. Not rushed. Not overloaded. Important knowledge was repeated slowly. Often in the same words. So it would settle gently into the mind. This repetition was not boring to them. It was comforting. Hearing familiar words meant safety. It meant continuity. In many communities, some people became known for remembering. Not officially. Not by title. But everyone knew who they were. The person who remembered family lines. The one who remembered old agreements. The one who remembered past disasters. These people spoke calmly. They did not exaggerate. When they spoke, others listened quietly. Their role was not to impress, but to preserve. And they passed this responsibility slowly, often to someone younger who showed patience and care. Silence was not empty. It was part of learning. When someone finished speaking, there was often a pause. No one rushed to respond. This silence allowed the words to settle. It allowed listeners to replay the story in their minds. In that quiet space, memory took root. Children learned not just from words, but from these pauses. They learned when to speak, and when to listen. Many lessons were never spoken aloud. They were hidden in movement. The way someone checked the sky before leaving home. The way tools were placed in the same spot each night. The way food was divided carefully. These actions taught order, responsibility, awareness. Watching these routines every day, children absorbed lessons without realizing it. No explanation was needed.
Travel was slow, very slow. When someone returned from a long journey, their stories carried weight. They spoke of different lands, different customs, different ways of doing familiar things. People listened closely. Not everything was adopted, but some ideas stayed. A new knot for tying loads, a new way to preserve food, a different planting pattern. Knowledge moved quietly from place to place, carried by tired feet and patient voices. No one expected instant understanding. Mistakes were accepted. If something failed, people adjusted. They learned by doing, not by being corrected harshly. This made learning calm. Fear did not block memory. Patience strengthened it. Knowledge grew slowly, but it lasted. Children were always watching, even when adults thought they were not. They noticed tone, body language, reactions. They learned who to trust, who to ask questions, who stayed calm during difficulty. These lessons were never written, but they shaped entire lives. The same stories were told to many generations. Each teller added small changes. Each listener remembered different parts, but the core remained. This slow evolution kept knowledge alive, not frozen, but flexible, able to survive change. Without books, time felt different. There was no urgency to record everything. People trusted memory. They trusted repetition. They trusted each other. And because of this, knowledge felt woven into life itself. Not separate, not formal, just there. Take another slow breath. Let the words fade if they wish. You do not need to hold on to them. In the next part, we will drift into how entire civilizations remembered laws, morals, and histories without writing, and how spoken knowledge shaped identity itself. For now, rest. Imagine the night deepening, the village sleeping, and only the quiet memory of voices remaining. In a world without books, rules were not written down. They were lived. People knew what was expected, because they had seen it done the same way, over and over again. How disputes were settled, how guests were treated, how shared land was respected. These rules were spoken aloud when needed. But most of the time, they did not need repeating. Everyone already knew. When someone forgot, they were gently reminded, not by pointing to a page, but by recalling a story of what happened last time, a story of consequences, a story of fairness. Stories shaped behavior quietly, without written laws. Justice depended on memory. Elders remembered past agreements. They remembered old boundaries. They remembered promises made long ago. When conflict arose, people listened carefully, not to argue, but to remember. Truth was shaped through shared recollection. Multiple voices filled in details. No single voice dominated. Justice was slow, but thoughtful, and because it relied on memory, people valued honesty deeply. Moral lessons were not delivered as lectures. They were demonstrated. Children learned kindness by watching adults help neighbors. They learned patience by seeing elders wait calmly. They learned humility by observing how mistakes were handled. Stories reinforced these lessons. Not dramatic stories, simple ones. A tale about generosity during a hard winter. A quiet memory of cooperation. These stories did not shame. They guided. Who you were was shaped by what you remembered. Family histories mattered. Children knew where their parents came from, what struggles had been faced, what values had been held. This created belonging. Even without written records, people felt rooted. They belonged to a place, a story, a shared past. Identity was spoken into existence. Many lessons lived inside names. A place name might describe an event long past. A family name might carry a story of origin. Sayings also carried wisdom. Short phrases, repeated often, held deep meaning. These sayings were easy to remember, easy to pass on. They became anchors of knowledge. Sometimes, learning came through questions. An elder might ask, "What happens if we plant too early?" The listener already knew the answer, but speaking it aloud reinforced memory. Questions invited reflection. They were not tests. They were gentle reminders. Meals were important moments. People gathered. They ate slowly. Conversation flowed naturally. This was when small pieces of knowledge passed hands. Advice, memories, observations. Children listened while chewing. Learning did not interrupt life. It blended into it. Without books, knowledge could not be hidden away. It lived in the open. Anyone who listened carefully could learn. This created balance. No single person controlled information. Wisdom belonged to the community. And because of that, knowledge felt alive. Take another slow breath. You may feel your thoughts slowing now. That is exactly as it should be. In the next part, we will drift into how ceremonies, seasons, and celebrations preserved knowledge, and how time itself became a teacher. For now, rest. Imagine the village sleeping, the rules unspoken, yet fully understood. Before calendars and printed pages, time was not written down. It was felt. People learned time through light and shadow, through warmth and cold, through growth and rest, the rising of the sun, the lengthening of days, the return of familiar winds. These patterns taught people when to act and when to wait. Time itself became a teacher, quiet and dependable. Each season brought lessons. Spring taught patience. Seeds did not rise immediately. Summer taught endurance. Work was long and steady. Autumn taught preparation. What was gathered mattered. Winter taught reflection. Stories became more frequent. Voices became softer. These lessons were not written. They were lived. Year after year, children learned seasons, not by names, but by experience. Ceremonies helped people remember, not grand celebrations, simple gatherings, lighting a fire at the same time each year, sharing a meal prepared the same way, speaking familiar words. These ceremonies marked time. They reminded people of what came before and what would come again. Knowledge tied to ceremony was rarely forgotten. Rituals were repeated carefully. The same steps, the same order. This repetition was comforting. It created stability in a changing world. Even children who did not fully understand learned through participation. Hands moved together. Voices spoke together. Understanding came later. People learned by noticing small changes. The way leaves turned earlier than expected. The way animals behaved differently one year. These observations were shared quietly. Someone might say, "The cold came sooner this time." Others listened. Knowledge adapted. No records were updated. No pages revised. Memory adjusted gently. Festivals were moments of joy, but also learning. Songs were sung again. Stories retold. Young people learned where they belonged. By participating, no explanations were needed. Belonging was felt. Without books, there was no rush to record. No fear of losing information overnight. People trusted continuity. They trusted memory. They trusted that what mattered would be remembered. And usually it was. Some knowledge faded, and that was acceptable. Rest. Imagine the seasons turning, time flowing softly, and learning happening without noise. Without books, knowledge traveled the longest distance of all, from one generation to the next. This did not happen suddenly. A child did not receive everything at once. Learning unfolded slowly across years, first through watching, then through helping, later through quiet responsibility. By the time someone reached adulthood, knowledge felt familiar, almost invisible. It had been absorbed gradually, like the smell of home. There were no lessons labeled as lessons. No one said, "Now you will learn." Learning happened in moments. A parent correcting a small mistake, an elder telling a familiar story again, a neighbor showing a quicker way to carry water. These moments were brief, gentle. They did not interrupt life. They were life. Not everything was remembered, and that was understood. Some details faded with time. Some practices slowly disappeared. Forgetting was not failure. It was adjustment. If a method no longer worked, it quietly slipped away. What remained was what still mattered. This kept knowledge light, not heavy. Change did not announce itself. There were no written comparisons between past and present. People adapted slowly. One generation did things slightly differently. The next adjusted again. No one marked the change. It happened naturally, without resistance. This made traditions flexible. Elders did not hold knowledge tightly. They shared it freely. They understood that younger generations would adapt it. This acceptance created calm. Knowledge was not frozen. It was alive. One quiet day, children became teachers. They showed younger ones how things were done. Without realizing it, they passed on what they had learned. This moment did not come with ceremony. It arrived naturally. Knowledge had completed its journey. No one carried everything alone. Memory belonged to the group. If one person forgot, another remembered. This shared memory created balance. Knowledge did not depend on a single mind. It survived through connection. Some memory stayed because of feeling. A story tied to warmth. A lesson learned during laughter. Advice given during calm moments. Emotion helped memory hold on. Fear was rarely used. Calmness made lessons last longer. As generations passed, knowledge shifted gently. No sharp breaks. No sudden loss. Just slow change. And because it was slow, it felt safe. Life continued. Children grew. Elders rested. Knowledge moved forward. Step by step. Not written. Not stored. But living. Take another slow breath. Your body may feel heavy now. Your thoughts may feel distant. That is good. In the next part, we will drift into how sound, rhythm, and spoken patterns helped memory survive, and how voices shaped the past. For now, rest. Imagine generations passing quietly, hands teaching hands, voices fading into sleep. Before ink and pages, the human voice was the archive. Everything important passed through sound. Tone mattered. Pace mattered. Silence mattered just as much as words. A calm voice made ideas feel safe. A steady rhythm made them easier to remember. People did not rush their speech. They allowed words to settle, one after another, like stones placed carefully along a path. Rhythm helped memory stay awake. Stories were told with patterns, phrases repeated in familiar ways, sentences balanced and slow. This made listening effortless. The mind did not strain. It followed naturally, just like a lullaby. Knowledge entered gently. Songs were more than entertainment. They carried directions, warnings, histories. A song about a river crossing. A song about a long drought. A song about a journey that should not be repeated. People sang while walking, while working, while resting. The melody helped memory hold on. Even when words shifted slightly, the meaning remained. Some knowledge was protected through repetition. Chants spoken the same way every time. These chants were slow, deliberate. They were not exciting. They were steady, because steadiness lasts. Children learned chants without realizing they were learning. The words became familiar friends. Familiar voices mattered. Knowledge shared by someone you trusted was easier to remember. People recognized voices in the dark. They knew who was speaking before words fully formed. This created comfort, and comfort strengthened memory. Storytellers were not entertainers. They did not act dramatically. They spoke calmly, often in the same tone used for daily conversation. This made stories feel real, not separate from life, but part of it. Listening was taught quietly. Children learned to sit still, to wait, to focus, not for long periods, just long enough. This skill stayed with them. It shaped how knowledge passed on. Voices carried across space. News traveled mouth to mouth, story to story. Each telling softened the edges. Urgency faded. Meaning stayed. Knowledge arrived gently, not sharply. Evenings were filled with low voices. Not loud, not demanding, just enough to be heard. These were the moments when knowledge moved most easily. Fire crackled softly. Wind brushed past walls. Voices blended into the night. Over time, memory and music became one. A song remembered a story. A story remembered a lesson. Nothing needed to be written. The mind already held it. Take another slow breath. Your thoughts may feel distant now. Your body may feel still. That is exactly right. In the next part, we will drift toward the quiet ending. How spoken knowledge slowly met writing, and how something gentle was lost and something new was gained. For now, rest. Imagine voices growing quieter, rhythm slowing, and memory humming softly in the dark. For a very long time, knowledge lived only in people. Then, slowly, very slowly, marks began to appear. Simple symbols, lines scratched into clay, shapes pressed into soft surfaces. These early marks were not meant to replace memory. They were reminders, a count of goods, a boundary, a simple record of exchange. The voice still mattered most. Writing arrived gently, almost shyly, into a world already rich with spoken knowledge. For a long while, spoken knowledge and early writing existed side by side. Stories were still told aloud. Songs were still sung. Lessons were still shown through action. Writing did not interrupt evenings by the fire. It did not silence elders. Instead, it waited quietly. Most people still learned the way they always had. By listening, by watching, by repeating. The rhythm of life remained unchanged. Writing could record facts, names, numbers, but it could not capture tone, pause, feeling. It could not show how long to wait before speaking, or when silence was more important than words. These things stayed in voices. They stayed in presence. Knowledge becoming still. As writing slowly spread, something subtle changed, no longer moving from voice to voice. It could sit quietly, unchanging. This brought safety, consistency, but it also removed the gentle flexibility that memory allowed. Spoken knowledge could adapt. Written knowledge stayed firm. Neither was better. They were simply different. When writing became more common, listening changed. People no longer needed to hear everything again. Some knowledge moved away from evenings and into stored places. This freed the voice, but also reduced how often it was needed. Stories were still told, but some became shorter, less repeated. Even after writing spread, much knowledge stayed unwritten. How to comfort someone, how to sense change in the air, how to read a room before speaking. These things could not be captured by marks. They remained human. They remained lived. Memory did not disappear. It changed. Instead of holding everything, it held what mattered most. Emotion, meaning, connection. Writing took care of detail. Memory took care of understanding. Together, they shaped the future. As time passed, the slow, oral world softened. Not lost, just transformed. Echoes of it remain even now. In lullabies, in traditions, in the way stories feel more real when spoken aloud. The old way of sharing knowledge was not inefficient. It was human. It allowed pauses. It allowed forgetting. It allowed growth. It trusted people, and that trust shaped civilizations. Take a slow breath in and let it out. Your body may feel warm and heavy now. Your thoughts may drift without direction. That is perfect. In the final part, we will gently close the story, reflecting on what remains today, and letting the night carry everything else away. For now, rest. Imagine the last fire dimming, voices fading into memory, and knowledge resting peacefully within people. Even now, in a world filled with books, screens, and endless words, the old ways have not vanished. They live quietly, in the way a parent explains something patiently, in the way a story feels warmer when spoken aloud, in the way a calm voice can teach more than written instructions. We still learn by watching, by listening, by repeating small actions until they feel natural. The ancient world is not gone. It is simply quieter now. People have always shared knowledge, not because they wanted to record history, but because they wanted others to live well, to survive, to belong, to feel safe. Books came later, but connection came first. A voice speaking into the evening, hands guiding hands. Stories told not for performance, but for comfort. The old way was slow, and in that slowness, there was peace. No urgency to capture everything. No fear of forgetting small details. People trusted that what mattered would remain, and it often did. Some knowledge cannot be written. How kindness feels, how patience sounds, how silence teaches. These things were passed gently, from presence to presence. They still are. Night was always important. It slowed people down. It softened voices. It made reflection natural. Knowledge shared at night felt different, calmer, safer. That is why stories lasted. Now, there is nothing more you need to hold. No facts to remember. No lessons to repeat. This story can fade, like voices growing quiet, like footsteps disappearing into distance. Knowledge has already passed through you. That is enough. Take one last slow breath. Let your body sink. Let your thoughts drift. Imagine a long line of people, across centuries, sharing knowledge quietly, without writing, without hurry. And now, they rest. So can you. The fire has burned low. The village is still. The night is deep and kind. Nothing more needs to be said. Sleep gently, and let the story stay behind.